Sherlock Holmes and the Farnsworth Case by Ngamoko Nikora. Chapter 1. The Return to Baker Street. Tom, Mark and Tipo stood before the familiar facade of 221B Baker Street, their hearts racing with excitement and anticipation. It had been a couple of years since they last assisted the famed detective Sherlock Holmes, and now, as young adults, they felt ready for another adventure. The boys, now aged 16 to 17, had maintained their bond over the years, their friendship made stronger through their shared experiences. "I can't believe we're back," Mark said, glancing at the door. "What kind of case do you think it will be this time?" "Something big, I hope," Tom replied, his fingers twitching with excitement. "I feel like we've grown since our last adventure." Tipo grinned. "Let's find out. After all, who wouldn't want to be a part of Sherlock Holmes's legacy?" With a deep breath, they knocked on the door. Mrs. Hudson opened it, her warm smile evident despite the years past. "You three? Come in, come in. I knew you'd return." Inside, the scent of tobacco and old books enveloped them. Holmes stood by a large desk cluttered with papers, his sharp eyes scrutinizing a letter. Upon seeing them, a rare smile broke through his usually serious demeanor. "Welcome back, my young friends. I am very glad to see you again." Chapter 2. A new mystery emerges. "Thank you for having us, Mr. Holmes," Tom said, his voice steady. "What's the case?" Holmes gestured for them to sit. A rather troubling series of events has unfolded. A wealthy diamond merchant, Mr. Albert Farnsworth, was found dead at his estate, and the circumstances are quite suspicious. Onlookers claim the diamond he was known to possess has vanished without a trace. "A diamond thief?" Mark asked, leaning forward. "That sounds dangerous." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his eyes narrowing, "but this is more than mere theft. The investigation has uncovered a web of deceit among those closest to him." "What do you need us to do?" Tipo asked, determination evident in his tone. "I thought you might accompany me to gather evidence at the crime scene," Holmes said, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Perhaps you can uncover something I overlook." Chapter 3. At the crime scene. The carriage ride to Farnsworth's estate was filled with anticipation. The grand mansion loomed ahead, its opulent exterior contrasting sharply with the sombre atmosphere surrounding it. A crowd gathered just outside, whispers of shock and sadness filling the air. As they approached the estate, Holmes addressed the gathering crowd. "Please allow us through. Detectives on the case," he announced confidently. People stepped aside, recognizing him immediately. Inside, the opulence was overshadowed by the tragedy that had unfolded. Farnsworth lay slumped over his desk, the unmistakable shine of the diamond gone from its pedestal. "This is dreadful," Tom said, peering at the lifeless figure. Holmes examined the scene. "Note the position of the body," he directed the boys. "It suggests he was caught by surprise. An intruder may have entered through the window, as it appears slightly ajar." "Doesn't look like a typical burglary to me," Tipo observed, glancing round. "If it was, why leave the rarest diamond so exposed?" "It's too clean for a simple robbery," Mark added. "What if it were staged?" Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "An important observation. Let's speak to the household staff and anyone who might offer insights." Chapter 4. Unravelling Motives. The boys began to interview the household staff, uncovering a tapestry of relationships and motives. The butler, Mr. Greaves, seemed nervous as he recounted the events of the night. "I assure you, Detective Holmes, I found him just as I entered the study," Greaves stammered. "Last I saw, Mr. Farnsworth was entertaining guests for dinner. I was pouring wine when I heard a commotion. Did you notice anyone acting suspiciously? Tom inquired. No, sir, but there was a heated argument between Mr. Farnsworth and his nephew, Charles, Greaves replied, glancing around as if fearful someone might overhear. Charles had financial issues, right? Mark prompted, recalling previous conversations about family dynamics. Greaves nodded gravely. His gambling debts are well known. He could not stand to inherit nothing. Tipo scribbled rapid notes in his notebook. What about the guests? Anyone else present that could serve as a potential suspect? Greaves hesitated, glancing toward the door. There were two other guests, Miss Eloise, the daughter of a neighbouring merchant, and Mr. Ramsay, an acquaintance of Mr. Farnsworth. Chapter 5. A Web of Deceit. After questioning the staff, the boys gathered in the main hall to discuss their findings, their whispers blending with the tension in the air. The nephew sounds like he could have been desperate enough to do this, Tom concluded. Well, what about Miss Eloise and Mr. Ramsay? Tipo jumped in. Maybe Eloise was there for more than just socialising. She could have wanted to marry Mr. Farnsworth for status or riches. Holmes joined them, his eyebrows raised in interest. It is crucial we understand her motives. Let's interview the other guests before forming hypotheses. They approached Miss Eloise, a graceful figure with an air of elegance that masked her discomfort. Miss Eloise, you attended the dinner the night before Mr. Farnsworth's death. Did anything unusual happen? Holmes inquired. Not at all, Detective, she replied smoothly, though her eyes flickered. It was simply dinner, lively conversation and laughter. I was shocked to hear the news. Holmes remained unconvinced. Is there anything you wish to share, as you were in a position to inherit? Her jaw clenched slightly. He had refused my father's proposal for our parents to be partners in business. I was merely upset. He chose to dismiss us. Yet you still stand to inherit his wealth, Tom chimed in, challenging her composure. Merely from business ties, not his estate, she spat back, gathering her resolve. How dare you insult my integrity with such implications? Chapter 6. The Glaring Alibi. Next, they approached Mr. Ramsay, a stout man with a jovial demeanour that barely concealed his nervousness. Mr. Ramsay, what was your relationship with Mr. Farnsworth? Holmes asked directly. We were just business partners, Detective. He had a great potential, but he often disregarded my advice. Ramsay replied, wringing his hands. His sudden passing is a loss to the industry. And where exactly were you on the night of the murder? Mark asked. I left precisely at 11 p.m., Ramsay stated firmly. It was later when I heard the commotion. I was already home. We'll verify that, Holmes replied curtly, his expression unreadable. Once the interviews concluded, the boys regrouped outside. They all have something to hide, Tipo remarked. But how do we prove it? I have an idea, Tom suggested. What if we create a confrontation? Put their alibis to the test. Chapter 7. Unravelling the Lies. The boys and Holmes returned to the estate under the guise of needing everyone for a quick meeting. We believe the murder may not be entirely random, Holmes announced dramatically, drawing all attention to himself. Detective, what do you mean? Mr. Ramsay inquired, his brow furrowed. There are inconsistencies in alibis, and I'd like to clarify your position at the time of death, Holmes continued, keenly observing their reactions. As they began separating them for questioning, tension filled the room. When asked about their whereabouts, all suspecting individuals shifted nervously as alibis began to collapse like a house of cards. "It appears your claims don't match up," Tom pointed out. "Perhaps we should call the constable," Tipo suggested, his sharp eyes darting between the guests. Chapter 8. The Turning Point. As they pressed further, Charles Farnsworth finally lost his composure. "You think you know everything," he shouted, his face flushed. "You have no idea what my uncle was capable of." "We're trying to get to the truth," Mark replied calmly. "What did he do?" Charles leaned in, fury evident. "He threatened to cut off my funds. I had nothing without him, the debts, the gamble, but I didn't kill him." "But you argued right before he died," Tipo said, voice rising in urgency. "What happened, Charles?" "The last time we talked he was furious, but I left in a fit," he exclaimed, frustration spilling over. "I didn't know he was dead until I got the news." Suddenly the atmosphere shifted. Tom felt the tension hanging heavy in the air. If he was cut off, who stands to gain from removing him? He pondered aloud. Chapter 9. The Clue in His Desk. Holmes remained silent as he observed the turmoil. Eventually he motioned for everyone to silence themselves, his gaze keen. "Mr. Greaves," he called suddenly. The butler stepped forward apprehensively, his eyes wide. "Yes, detective?" "When was the last time you saw the diamond prior to the murder?" Holmes queried sharply. Greaves' mouth twisted nervously. "He had it secured in his desk drawer at the time," he mumbled beneath his breath. "Let's check," Holmes commanded, leading the way toward the desk. Chapter 10. The Evidence Surfaces. As they approached the desk, Holmes rifled through its contents, finally unearthing a small velvet pouch nestled among old letters. The boys exchanged glances, anticipation buzzing in the air as Holmes opened it to reveal the diamond, gleaming ominously. "It's the diamond!" Tom gasped, realizing its significance. "But how did it end up here?" Mark asked, thunderstruck. Holmes' expression darkened. "This little piece of evidence points to more than mere theft. It confirms treachery among the suspects." Chapter 11. Confronting the Truth. With evidence in hand, Holmes gathered everyone in the drawing room once again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe this will clarify the matter," he announced as he held up the diamond. "The true nature of this crime is emerging." Everyone fell silent, eyes wide with shock. "The diamond was missing. How did you find it?" Charles demanded. "Returning to each of your motives proved insightful," Holmes explained, pacing. "It appears the diamond was hidden for a reason, perhaps by someone who knew it would reduce suspicion. Was it you, Mr. Ramsay? Perhaps you wanted to finance your own ventures." Ramsay's face paled. "What on earth do you mean?" Holmes paused dramatically, revealing the truth one by one. "You stand to gain much by removing Farnsworth. First, the money. Second, the diamond itself. But there's more to this story, isn't there?" Chapter 12. The Conclusion. Holmes's piercing gaze swept over each suspect, who finally fell silent under the pressure. The patron's former partners slowly crumbled beneath the weight of conviction and paranoia. "I did not kill him," Ramsay gasped, shaking. "But I knew of Charles's debts. He'd come to me begging for more time. He needed money, and I refused." "Did you provide it under the notion of extending your partnership?" Holmes concluded, firm. "I never intended to hurt him," Ramsay protested, but fell silent under Holmes's unyielding stare. The constable arrived promptly then, concluding the showdown. With the evidence piled high, Holmes ensured proper actions taken against those deemed implicated. "Consider yourselves fortunate. Your scheme resulted in fewer casualties than could have occurred," Holmes warned, grim yet certain. Chapter 13. Reflecting on Growth. Once they verified the details and apprehended the guilty parties, the boys reflected on the experience over tea back at Baker Street. "You have come a long way since we first met," Holmes remarked appreciatively. "Thanks to you, Mr. Holmes," Tom replied, a smile breaking across his face. "This was different, but no less incredible." Mark leaned back, relishing the moment. "The cases have only gotten tougher, but we are capable of handling them now." Tipo raised his cup in solidarity. "To friendship and adventures," he called. Chapter 14. A Future of Possibilities. As dusk settled, the boys prepared to leave Baker Street once more, the warmth of their renewed bond illuminating each step toward the door. "What's next for us?" Tipo wondered aloud. "For now, I think another mystery may be in your future," Holmes hinted, a twinkle of mischief in his eye. "But whatever it is, do not lose the spirit you have shown today." With grateful hearts, the boys made their way to the familiar oak tree once more, knowing their adventures with Sherlock Holmes were far from over. With hope for future mysteries and challenges, they began to step into the light, their friendship as resolute as ever, ready for whatever lay ahead. Sherlock Holmes and the Farnsworth Case by Ngamoko Nikora. Copyright Ngamoko Nikora.